1600 in the UK. I'm ready to go. I hope you're ready to go too. So welcome to the third in my series of webinars on becoming a director. The first one we dealt with was how to become a director, and the next one was the due diligence to do before you accept. So this one is about what to do when you get the opportunity, and in particular induction and the first 100 days. So let's go straight ahead with my prepared presentation. Becoming a director, induction, and the first 100 days. So I'm Richard Winfield. I help new directors and boards become more confident, more effective, more quickly. And the first thing you need to think about, I suggest, is that you need to change your mindset. Whether you are becoming an executive director within your own organization, or whether you're becoming a non-executive director, you will be a different sort of person from the days when you were just a manager. So when you achieve your first directorship, it is probably because you've been successful as an executive, either in the company or elsewhere. It's important to recognize that directorship and management are totally different types of role. There are contradictory forces of balancing short-term and long-term priorities. Now, I'm sure that if you were a senior manager, you would claim that you thought long-term, but it is a different way of thinking because it's more strategic when you're working at board level. The magnitude of the decisions is greater, both in terms of the money involved and the duration. The style of decision-making is also different. Strategic decisions are more complex with longer time horizons. Now, let me teach you, this is my own little model, my view of a director's career. And if you look at the bottom of the triangle, you will see it is wide. And I would suggest that when you arrive, you have probably finished, you might have finished a professional qualification, or you might have finished a graduate degree or an apprenticeship, whatever it is. But you don't know very much, but you do know about an awful lot. You've got a very broad basis of experience. And as you get more and more promoted, unfortunately, these days you get more and more specialist until you reach the top of the department and you're ready to be promoted to the board when you know absolutely everything about nothing at all. You're very, very, very specialist. So the next stage in your career is to join the board. And what does that mean? It means that you, as a specialist in your own sphere, now need to be able to act as a specialist in all the other departments. You have equal interest and responsibility for all the other departments. So whether you're a non-executive or an executive director, you need to be able to think much more broadly, and you need to be able to master the different departments and activities within an organization. And then you need to be able to look outside. So you need to be able to represent the company externally, and you need to be able to look for and find information that's relevant coming in. So it's a big change, and you should recognize that and take account of it during the transition. So you should recognize that many of your relationships will change, particularly if you are an appointment or a promotion within the organization. And of course, if you're coming in from outside as a non-executive, you're having to build new relationships. So here are some of the things to think about. What do customers, suppliers, and other stakeholders now expect of you? Because you do have a different role. You are now formally a representative of the organization. You need to be careful sometimes what you say, because it has authority that you might not intend. How do you handle the dual responsibilities of head of department and board member? So obviously, if you're an executive director, you've got these two roles. And when I work with companies, I've got 4 hats, a whole series of 4 hats, and I get them moving around. But the hats are such as you can be the boss or director, you can be the manager, you can also be an owner, and you can also be an employee, and you can be up to 4 of those things at once. When you're working at board level, you need to be able to differentiate who you are and how you should behave. What practical steps should you take to improve your awareness, develop new skills, and establish yourself in your new role? And I do strongly recommend, we talk about induction in the first 100 days. I do strongly recommend that you see it as a project to make this transition and you invest in it. These are some of the things that you should address during your induction. The objective of induction is to provide a new director with the information that you will need to become as effective as possible in your new role within the shortest practical time. Induction should include building an understanding of the nature of the company, its business, and the markets in which it operates. Now, clearly, that is a challenge if you're a non-executive coming from outside. But bearing in mind my career model from before, if you have been the head of a department, you'll need to know more about how other departments operate and also to build relationships within them. You need to build a link with the company's people. Get out, see them, visit them, and be seen to be seeing them and take an interest. You need to build an understanding of the company's main relationships. These may be with the shareholders, most likely, but also with suppliers, maybe with the press, the media, all sorts, because you are now an official spokesman. You should expect to allow 10 days for induction. Now, not 10 days together, because I suggest it's over 100 days, but you need to allow about 10 days worth of input. So here are some issues that you ought to expect to address during your induction. You need to find out about the board and committee structure and their terms of reference. Now, what I would recommend is that your first port of call should be either the company secretary or the company chairman. Either way, those two are the key people. The chairman is responsible for your induction, but the company secretary is the person working with and for the chairman who will actually manage it for you. Furthermore, these sorts of things are informations that the company secretary should easily be able to make available to you. You need to know a little bit about the other people involved, so biographical and contact details of all directors of the company secretary, and certain key executives, so how you can contact them and who they are. You need to understand about board meetings and preferably be able to read through and study some recent minutes. You need to know about the dates and places in the future and also the procedures, what will happen and how they work. And you also probably need to be able to use the systems and the technology within the organization. And it may be, for instance, this includes things like having a new email address and business cards and such like. But it also probably needs that you can get into the system for, increasingly these days, the board reports may well be online or available on tablet computers and such like. You need to be able to understand quite a lot of this. Boardroom behaviors, culture and values, codes of conduct, ethics. So the board, the directors on the board, they are a human collection. They will be a team, they will have a culture, and they will have ways of doing things. And these may be very specific to the particular board, or they may be fairly normal. Certainly, you need to be able to discover these. And the best place to do that is to talk to the chair. You should read the Articles of Association or the Constitution, whatever it is that gives you the rights to do what you do. And I recommend to people they should always have their personal copy, and you should read it with a highlighter so that the important bits are easy to look at should you need to come back to them. You need to understand the board procedures and confidentiality. Clearly, you need to be conscious of confidentiality, but also if you are a quoted company in any way, there will be certain rules about what you can and cannot say or do in certain times of the financial year. So you need to understand these, and if you're new to the board, it's really quite a serious subject. Board appraisal and development program. There should be an annual appraisal, and you should have a development program. And this is, again, something to talk through with the chair. And if there isn't one, you should ask why. You need just to know what are current issues, what's going on at present, what's important, and the nature of the company, its business and its markets. Again, it's general, getting to know the understanding and have an understanding of how the company works internally and externally. You should be able to arrange meetings with senior management, and you should certainly visit company sites if the company is spread around, and particularly if it has manufacturing or distribution sites that are outside the general office block. You also need to have details of employee committees and any surveys that are being taken, particularly, for instance, staff engagement or morale surveys. Information about the main stakeholders. Now, meeting your chair will be an important stage in the induction. I've already mentioned that, but I would like to emphasize it again. It's really important. The company secretary should be your personal advisor, I think, at this stage. But your relationship with the chair is important, and you should spend time discussing that and building a good rapport and a relationship. So here are some questions I've designed actually many, many years ago, 5 questions for new directors. Firstly, have you discussed your role with the chair? This is quite important. And there are 2 sides to your role. There's the role that, what is the chair, he or she, expect of you as a director? But also, perhaps more important, why have you been appointed to this board? And are there any particular contributions that the chair will be expecting from you? And if so, were you aware of that, and are you up to scratch with it? And you may well want to do some extra research just to bring yourself up, if the chair considers that you are the relevant person. What does it mean to you to be a director? Because it is not just a nice name, it is an important role, but it is also an ambassadorial role. So you need to work out what it really means to you. And have you discussed your role with your staff and colleagues? This is particularly relevant for an executive director, because your role will change your relationship. It will change your status and your profile and your identity. Talk it through. And it may well be that you need to delegate some more work to provide the time that you will need to contribute. Now, this is a very important thing. How should you trawl for information? And I talk about antennae, because there are 2 sides to this. Now, let me go back. Firstly, is where, and I think I come across this later, where should you look for information in terms of whether you should be reading different magazines and newspapers, whether you should be watching or listening to different programs on the media, but particularly, what are the things you should be noticing? Because whereas you might have been particularly interested in your particular discipline and technology, you should now be looking much more widely. It needs to think it through just to make yourself more conscious of what you should be up to. How and where should you network? And particularly, who are you when you're networking? Because now you are representing the organization. But in terms of where you should network, I recommend that every director should be expected on the company's expense to attend at least one conference in an area outside their specialism, where they're going to get new ideas and meet different sorts of things. You should also ensure that you obtain a formal job description. This will summarize the things that you've been discussing a little bit earlier with me. This is just the same as being appointed to an employee job. You need a description, a formal job description, which should contain general duties as a director and according to company law, specific duties and responsibilities agreed with the chairman, and I've discussed that. You need to get that down as part of the agreement in writing. And also, you should need to understand the Companies Act. The Companies Act sets out 7 general statutory duties. And they're very interesting because the Companies Act now is a long time ago, 2006. The duties are still very relevant and up to date, but the interpretation is now has evolved. So you need to understand about those. So to comply with the company's constitution and decisions made under the constitution, and to exercise your powers as a director only for the reasons for which they were given. So you do need to understand your articles or constitution. To act in a way the director considers in good faith is most likely to promote the success of the company for the benefit of its members as a whole. So as a director, and as I've mentioned, if you're a director of another company as well, if you're a director of this company, you're always working for the long-term benefit of this company and its various stakeholders. And the words in good faith are quite important, because it means that if ever you're challenged, you can only claim that you did your best. As long as you do your best at the time, even if you get things wrong, you've done what you consider in good faith is most likely to promote the success. So you don't have to be perfect. In performing this duty, A director must have regard to all relevant matters. So the argument, yes, Judge, I didn't know, nobody told me, will not hold water. You need to be proactive in making your decisions. The following matters are specifically identified in the legislation. The likely consequences of any decision in the long term. The interests of the company's employees, not just the shareholders. The need to foster the company's business relationships with suppliers, customers, and others, and to take account of the impact of the company's operations on the community and the environment. This was written in 2006, and it is still very relevant, but it's increasingly high profile. The desirability of the company if you do disagree with a decision, it's very important that you make sure that your disagreement is minuted and that your minutes justify it. To exercise reasonable care, skill, and diligence. And again, reasonable will have a legal meaning. To avoid conflicts or possible conflicts between the interests of the director and those of the company. And this is something you should take very seriously. Not to accept benefits from third parties by reason of being a director or doing anything as a director. So this area of ethics is quite important because sometimes you can slip into it. You need to talk through perhaps with the chair and the company secretary what this might mean in practice so that you're aware of it in advance. And to declare any interest in a proposed transaction or arrangement. And I would expect that each board meeting would start off with the declarations of interest stage so that this is brought out. In addition to these duties, a director has more duties. To consider or act in the interests of creditors, particularly in times of threatened insolvency. And it's very important that you understand this, that when you're in any risk in terms of insolvency, your priorities change to be 100% in the interests of creditors. To maintain confidentiality of the company's affairs. Right, best practice. Best practice requires that information is provided sufficiently in advance of meetings to enable thorough consideration of the issues facing the board, and that it is sufficiently accurate, clear, and timely. Now, I recommend that at least once a year the board has a specific discussion on the information it needs, the timing of the information, and the format of the information. But if you are to be able to behave competently, you need to have the necessary information. So again, when you are in your induction stage, ask these questions. And if it's not satisfactory, we might even suggest that they change the way. But you need to know how, when, and where you will get the information that you need. You should insist on this, as I've just mentioned. It's really important. Proper preparation is more than reading the board papers beforehand. I've been to meetings where I weep. Preparation includes the time you spend reading, watching, and listening to the media. I've mentioned it. You need to have a strategy, a personal strategy for monitoring the media. It includes time spent networking, we've discussed that, and time spent visiting employees and the company's facilities. So being ready to make a decision requires quite a lot of work, not just reading the minutes, reading the agenda. In addition, you should continuously refresh your knowledge and skills and make sure you're up to date with the latest developments in areas such as corporate governance and financial reporting and the industry and market conditions. And I shall be telling you at the end of this about my proposal for you, my offering to you to help you to do that. Particularly when you first join a board, you might not want to ask naive or apparently stupid questions. But these are the questions which are often the best way to spark a creative insight into problem solving and to challenge the groupthink. And I recommend that when you're talking to the chair, when you first start, this is something to talk through. What is he or she prepared to do, prepared to accept? And maybe will they actually help you in your first couple of meetings? because this is the time when you establish your reputation and set the standards that other people will expect of you. Assertiveness is being prepared to challenge what we've just been talked about. Discuss your role with the chairman and confirm the importance and acceptability of challenge. And if your chair does not like to be challenged in public, you might want to consider whether this is the best place for you. If intelligent challenge is not welcomed, you should certainly consider your position. Decision making. Well-informed and high-quality decision-making is a critical requirement for a board to be effective and does not happen by accident. And I would just like to say, I believe you should understand how decisions are made and you should understand the various processes that are available. But you should expect that the main decisions are made by the senior managers, so that when they bring to you a proposal, you can be confident that they've talked it through and checked it and tested it. Your role will mainly be challenging them to make sure that the proposals have been properly prepared. However, there will also be critical decisions that you need to make. And maybe one of the times when you do some of this work is at the annual corporate retreat, when you look at long-term strategy scenarios and such like. Boards can minimize the risk of poor decisions by investing time in the design of their decision-making policies and processes. And it could be sensible that at the end of every board meeting, you have a quick review on how we made the decisions. Not what did we decide, but how effective were we? How well were they challenged? And how well did people integrate themselves? Boards can benefit from reviewing past decisions, particularly ones with poor outcomes, including the decision-making process used. Now, taking into account, you may have made a wrong decision, as it turned out, but it may have been that in advance, when you made the decision, the knowledge you had could only lead to the decision you did make. Or it might have been that you ignored things and you did not do sufficient research and preparation. It's important to differentiate between those two and make sure that in future you have a better process. You should ensure that you have a general understanding of decision-making processes. And again, I cover decision-making processes in my masterclass. So here's something to consider when making decisions. Firstly, what is the context of the decision? Shouldn't be thinking it's just in the cold. Particularly, this is why you're appointed as a director to think more broadly. You should consider that appropriate decision-making strategies and whether they have been applied by the managers. Bring in creativity and innovation. Systems thinking. You should understand what these mean and what the processes are. And particularly, again, at the corporate retreats, these are times when you should really get involved in them. What about execution of decision? Decision's important, but it's how it's carried out and how the execution is then monitored, which is important. Decision-making process and style, and this will depend again on the makeup and the balance of the board. Right, your personal training. The company should provide the necessary resources for developing and updating its directors' knowledge and capabilities. Now, did you read what I said? The company should provide. You are required to keep yourself up to date. But you should expect that the company will provide you either with the resources or the opportunities or with the funds so that you're able to do this. The chairman should regularly review and agree with each director their training and development needs, with an individual evaluation of each director to show whether they are continuing to contribute effectively. And this would be very useful in advance of the annual general meeting so that the chair can stand up in public and explain that he has challenged and reviewed each of the directors, and he is or is not, or she is or is not, confident that they are making a good contribution and justifying their existence. Because increasingly, shareholders will challenge the continuation of a director's role. Such appraisals can be the basis for agreeing a personal development plan. Now, The biggest challenge, I think, for directors after having enough time is obtaining enough information. So this is just a review. All directors must ensure that they know what is going on and that they have adequate knowledge to make a contribution to board level discussions consistent with their own levels of expertise. And I think this trend, this message has been coming throughout the webinar. Outside directors and the chair should have access to the same information and information systems as the executive directors. So they shouldn't be in a position where the executive directors can pull the wool over their eyes. Shareholders and courts are not sympathetic to directors, both executive and non-executive, who have not known enough about company matters, and I mentioned that earlier. Knowledge and awareness can be developed from a wide range of sources. It's a director's responsibility to develop sensitivity and awareness to sources and subjects, including formal and official information sources, informal and unofficial information sources, regular board papers, reports given in meetings, official correspondence, ad hoc reports and presentations, economic reports, and these might be about your industry, they might be in the Financial Times or whatever you read, or they may be brought to you by a specialist. Visits and presentations, it's up to you to get out, learn. And questioning in meetings. You will also have contacts within the company, and unless you get out and meet people, you won't learn much. Off-the-record comments, unofficial probing and questions. So that gives you quite a lot of stuff to think about in terms of keeping yourself up to date with knowing what's going on. Now, a challenge for you, just a thing to keep in mind all the time, is this question of conflicts of interest. In a company, you may have several roles, as I mentioned earlier. As well as acting as a director, you might also own shares. You might, particularly in the smaller companies, lend the company money and guarantee loans. You might actually be a supplier or customer or other significant stakeholder. Directors of more than one company should pay particular attention to the potential for conflicts of interest. So where there is a potential for conflict of interest, directors must make a declaration of interest and will not be allowed to vote on such a matter. And as I mentioned earlier, it's good practice to start each board meeting with a question just about conflicts of interest. Directors must be extremely careful if they want to take advantage of an opportunity for private profit in an area of activity similar to that of the company, even if the company has rejected the particular proposition. And I do cover this in my program. Sometimes it's almost unrealistic, because if you bring a proposal to the company and they refuse and say it's not for them, and then you go ahead and it's successful, it's possible that the shareholders might want to claim some of that money. And if you are representing an industry or an expertise in a particular company, you may well be exposed to other opportunities outside. It is something you need to be quite careful about, because it can come back, so to speak, and bite you in the future. So this is just a specific information I've just been saying. If a director profits personally from his or her position, even if the company itself hasn't suffered because of their action, a court could order him or her to pass any profits made to the company. That would be really frustrating, wouldn't it? However, there's good news. The courts are fair. When there is a conflict of interest between various roles, the courts will usually support a director if you can show that you have acted honestly, reasonably, and transparently. And this is why it's really important to make sure that your contributions and your challenges and your actions are properly recorded, preferably in company minutes, but you should also keep your own records. Time, the other great challenge. To be able to fulfill the duties of a director, fully understanding issues and contributing productively, a director needs to commit sufficient time, and sufficient is surprisingly large. Many companies require a time commitment of between 150 and 200 hours a year. It's quite significant, especially if you might be thinking you could have several directorships. The average board commitment for a listed company, which probably doesn't affect so many people, has been quoted as 300 hours per year, with other estimates varying between 15 and 30 days. So you might think that directors at listed companies are quite nicely paid. That sounds good, but there is a lot of time involved. And the following activities will add to the amount of time that a non-executive must devote to a board. Note these, please. Becoming familiar with the specific industry in which a company operates and with the business of the company in general. So that's two things. It's your induction period and it's the ongoing keeping up to date and awareness. Serving on committees of the board, especially serving on an audit committee. It's very likely that you will soon be appointed to a committee and then you'll have all the committee meetings to attend and prepare for. But it's also possible that after a year or two, you might be invited to be a chair of a committee, which will take up even more time. So you need to take account of that at the stage when you're accepting a directorship, not only what you need to do in the near future, but what you might be expected to do rather later. To commit the time for a full and proper induction and then enjoy making a contribution. Now, I've hinted, look out for the next webinar in which I explain how you can become more confident as a director, more effective, more quickly. So I have prepared a program of which I'm very proud, which is designed specifically for new directors, but also for directors who want to improve their performance. So it's a multimedia program. It's curated, delivered, and supported by me. You will have direct access to me if you want support or a sounding board. It has been tested repeatedly internationally, and it is continuously added to and kept up to date because I am very enthusiastic for corporate governance and board level activity, and I monitor these things around the world. And if you act next week, you can save 50% on the price. So look forward to the next webinar. The Essential Directorship Masterclass, I shall cover it in full next week. And please, in the meantime, spend some time to explore the directorsacademy.com. Thank you very much. From me, Richard Winfield, until the next webinar in which I talk about how you can invest in your own skills and competence. Goodbye.